Mr. Nichols, would you please come forward here into the witness box and raise your right hand so that you can be sworn?
I do. Jerold, Jerold, Nichols, Nichols.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, sir. Could you please tell the court and jury your name?
Jerold Nichols,
And Mr. Nichols, where are you from?
Staton County.
Now, how far away is that? I'm not from Kansas, and I understand it's close to the Colorado border, but could you tell us where that is?
Yes, it's 19 miles east of the Colorado border on the southwest corner.
And about how many miles from here is it?
250.
Well, thank you very much for coming. Did you come at a request to subpoena?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you very much. You and I have never met before, have we?
No, we have not.
And you and I have never talked before, have we?
No, sir.
I would like to simply ask you a couple of questions about your knowledge. What do you do, sir?
At present, I work for Prairie Contractors, a fertilizer contractor.
And at any time, did you work at the Staton County Detention Facility?
Yes, I did. For
What did you do, sir?
I was a jailer for 6 years.
And to your knowledge, is Staton County like other county jails in this state? I mean, is it different, or is it, to your knowledge, pretty much all the county jails are similar?
I think pretty much all county jails are similar.
How do you become a jailer? What do you have to do?
Well, you apply first. If you get the job, there is a little training goes into it. You have to do intoxilizers. We have to go through first aid safety courses. Read the jail manual. And pretty much that's it.
Okay. What sort of first aid safety courses?
Oh, it's just a first aid for heart attack, or just in general as a first aid course for emergencies.
Well, what are you supposed to do as a jailer if you come upon a emergency, what you think is a medical emergency, like somebody having a heart attack or somebody dying?
Well, you contact the dispatcher to contact the doctor, ambulance, and then do whatever you can do to keep them alive until the ambulance gets there.
Have you actually had experience calling ambulances before?
No, I have not.
Have you seen it done in your jail, or when you were there at the jail?
No, we did not. This one?
Okay. I guess you were lucky then that you didn't have to encounter that.
Yes.
But if you had, you would be prepared to do it.
I would hope to think so, yes.
Okay. Was there a procedure that you had to follow? You just could call the ambulance, 911 or something like that?
Our dispatcher has a direct line to the hospital via radio.
Very good. Now, I'm going to talk to you about this case and your knowledge of this case. First of all, did you have occasion to come in contact with a gentleman by the name of Terry Bruner.
Yes, I did.
How did you come in contact with him?
As a jailer, we was back with the inmates all the time.
Now, sometimes, or we've heard, and I know there's going to be evidence, I think you're going to help us with some of it, that Terry was serving time for drunk driving and was transferred from Sedgwick to Staton. Did you have knowledge of that?
I had knowledge that he was a Sedgwick County inmate.
How did that work? In other words, was that something Sedgwick County did all the time, or did you have any understanding of why people were coming from Sedgwick County over to Staton County to be in your jail?
Staton County contracts with Sedgwick County. Typically, we would house 20 of their inmates at one time.
And by contracting, you mean they entered a contract where they paid Staton County to take care of their people?
That's correct.
How long had that been going on? And I'm now going back to the time when Terry Bruner was there, and this would have been in November to March of 2008, 2007.
I was there 6 years. They are still contracting with them, and prior to that, quite a few years.
Okay. When did you leave finally?
Pardon me?
You indicated you left at some point from being a jailer.
2010.
All right. So you were a jailer from approximately 2003, 2004 to 2010?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. And were you aware that Terry Bruner had been sent over on the contract between Sedgwick and Staton to be at Staton?
Your Honor, I guess I'm time conscious. I don't understand how this is relevant to the issues in the case.
It's just some background, and I really don't believe I'm going to take up a lot of time, Your Honor.
All right, you can ask this question, then we'll move right along.
Were you aware of when he came over to the jail?
Yes.
How did you become aware? How were you aware when he came?
We have intake in them, and we have contact. We cooked for them. We fed them. Any problems arose, we had to deal with it.
Okay. Did you speak to him?
On numerous occasions, yes.
Did he have the ability to speak?
Yes.
What sort of person was he? Was he cooperative?
He was quiet, cooperative, never gave any problems.
All right. How often did you see him to make those observations?
On my shift, probably 6, 7 times a day.
What do you mean? How would you see him? Wouldn't he be locked in a cell?
He would be in a dorm, but as a jailer, we would every hour have to go back and observe and look for problems or...
And did you talk to him during those times? Would you
Yes,
talk to
I did.
him? I mean, would you walk by him, or did you say, "Hello, Mr. Bruner, how are you doing?"
I knew him as Mr. Bruner. Yes, I did speak to him.
And that happened 5, 6, 7 times a day.
If he was there, yeah, and he wanted to speak, yes.
And if he was laying in a cell sick, would you be able to see him and determine that, or is that...
Yes, I would.
All right. Did he ever complain to you about anything, or did there come a time when he complained to you or you became aware that he was not right or getting sick?
On the morning of March the 5th, I became aware that he was not well.
Okay. How did you become aware of that, sir?
We would cook breakfast and serve breakfast. The inmates that would come out of their, we'd let them out of their cells. They would come through the cafeteria, get their meal trays, and go back and eat.
And how did you become aware that he was sick?
He did not show up for breakfast that morning.
And so what did you do, Mr. Nichols?
Myself and Mr. Shepard, another jailer that was there at the time, took his tray back to see what the problem was.
And why were you concerned that he wasn't eating?
Well, that's typically how we'd do a jail check. Every person in the jail would eat, and that's how we knew that everybody was there.
I got that. Now, you said on this particular occasion he didn't eat. Why would that cause you alarm?
Another inmate that come through the line said that Mr. Bruner had been sick, and he didn't want to eat.
So why did you take it upon yourself to go and see him or talk to him? I mean, why not just leave him alone and let him lie there?
Well, that's my job. That was my job, to find out why he didn't eat.
And did you go back and talk to him?
Yes, I did.
Tell me, Mr. Nichols, what you said.
Went back and confronted Mr. Bruner as to why he didn't come get his tray. Said he had the flu and he didn't feel like eating.
Okay. And did that cause you some concern?
Well, not necessarily, no, other than what the inmate had told us at cafeteria.
All right. So what did you do then? You talked to him, told you he had the flu, he didn't feel well. What happened then?
Asked him if he needed a doctor. He said no.
Well, if he had said yes, would you have gotten him a doctor?
That was my job, yes. I
Okay.
would have at least talked to the sheriff or undersheriff, my supervisors.
If you had found him lying unconscious, would you have gotten him a doctor if he didn't ask for it?
Yes, I would.
Why?
Well,
Your Honor, I think we're getting into kind of standard of care stuff. I don't think how it's relevant to the case, what happened in Sedgwick County, and I object.
I agree.
I think it's very relevant to what happened because he does the same jobs as the defendants do. And I don't think there's any difference between a jailer in Staton County and a jailer in Sedgwick County.
Counsel, you know that's not the issue in this case. The issue is whether these two defendants were deliberately indifferent to Mr. Bruner's serious medical needs, given what they knew at the time. So it really doesn't matter what Mr. Nichols saw that might have been different from these two defendants.
Thank you, Your Honor. And so, what did you do next?
discussed with Mr. Shepard after talking to Mr. Bruner, more so because of the inmate that told us he had been sick. Discussed about calling Sedgwick County to see what they wanted to do since they have medical staff on the premises. On a typical event like this, they'd either call a medication out for the inmate or tell us to take them to the doctor, or pretty much that was their decision. They told us, not myself, but Mr. Shepard, to just transport him back the next day.
Did you think he was in, it was necessary, at least in terms of what you could perceive in terms of his sickness, that he get medical care, that he see a doctor?
I thought he looked sick, yes, I did.
And based upon your observations that you saw him and you thought he looked sick, did you think it was appropriate to send him back across the state to Staton to see a doctor? Is that why you called?
That's why we called, yes, to get him some sort of medical attention.
And did Sedgwick County agree to come and get him and provide him medical care back at Sedgwick?
Mr. Shepard talked to Sedgwick County. After we confronted Mr. Bruner, I clocked out and went home.
Okay. And did you come back the next day?
I come back, yes.
And was Mr. Bruner there? Had he been taken away already?
No, he was still there.
Okay. What happened then when you arrived back? What shift did you work, by the way?
Night shift from 7 in the evening till 7 in the morning.
Okay, so on the 5th he was there. On the 6th he was there too?
I would have come back on the evening of the 5th.
Okay, I'm sorry, that's right. Okay. So we're talking about the 4th going into the 5th and now the 5th going into the 6th.
That's correct.
And when you came back that evening on the 5th, he was still there?
Yes.
Okay. what happened then?
Nothing happened. I observed him through the night.
I'm sorry.
I observed him through the night.
Were you concerned about him because you had heard he was sick, he had said he was sick, and you had called for help?
No, when I come back on, Mr. Shepherd said he had called for help, and they said they would transport him the next day.
Okay. So why did you continue to look in on him then through the night?
That's what we do. Every hour we go back and observe the inmates. After 11 o'clock, they're all locked down. That didn't mean they typically slept. A lot of them stayed up and played cards.
Okay. And did you keep an extra special eye on him because you knew he was sick and going back to Sedgwick?
I could see Mr. Bruner through the door beanhole that we called it, and his bunk was just right across the hallway. So yes, I could see him every time I went back that evening.
Did you have occasion to ask him how he was doing?
Yes.
What happened?
He was unresponsive as to really how he was doing, other than he was ill.
Did he communicate that he was ill, or he was just unresponsive?
He just unresponsive.
How could you tell that he was ill then still?
He looked ill. He sat on his bunk. He wasn't up mingling with the other inmates.
When you say he looked ill, describe to us how he looked.
Perspiring. I really don't know, other than he just didn't look like he felt good.
And you're not a doctor or anything. You could just tell just by being an ordinary person?
I would say yes. I'm not a doctor, and I could tell he wasn't feeling good.
Why did you ask if he needed to see a doctor?
Well, if he felt bad enough to see a doctor at that point in time, that's probably what we would have done, is get him local doctor to look at him.
Now, did he say he didn't want to tell you he didn't want to see a doctor?
Yes, he did.
Well, in light of that, why did you just persist in making sure that he got seen by a doctor, or you and Mr. Shepherd? Why did you persist in the matter? Why didn't you just leave it alone?
I couldn't make him go see a doctor if he didn't want to go. It was his choice.
But you made arrangements to have him send back, you and Mr. Shepherd.
That's correct.
So you were going to get him at least a place where he could get care no matter what he wanted to do.
It wasn't our intention necessarily to send him back to Sedgwick County, as it was to talk to Sedgwick County Medical to see if they wanted to prescribe medications to our pharmacy, or what they wanted to do with him.
Did they prescribe any medication for him?
No, they did not.
Did he want to go back to Sedgwick, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, the morning of the 6th, when I went back to tell him he was going to Sedgwick County, he said no, he did not want to go back.
Did he tell you why?
No.
Is that the final contact that you had with him?
Yes.
Did you see him go back, or did he go back at a time when you were off shift?
I would have been off shift. I would have left at 7:30, 8 o'clock, and transport usually showed up at noon.
When's the next time you heard anything about Mr. Bruner or learned anything?
When Lieutenant Moore called to inform us that Mr. Bruner had died.
And this is a Lieutenant Moore from the Sedgwick Police Department?
That's correct.
And did you have any understanding of why he died? What was the purpose of the call?
She called us to inform us that we needed to prepare a statement. Pretty much that was most of the conversation.
Were you curious at all how Mr. Bruner had been in your care and then sent back and do you remember when that call was, I should ask?
Yes.
When was that?
It was approximately 4 to 5 days after we had transported Mr. Bruner back.
Okay. Did you ask what happened?
I believe that Sheriff Bozzona had told us what had happened.
Sheriff Pizzone is your sheriff?
Yes.
Okay. Did you talk to the Sedgwick County officer and ask her any questions?
I don't recollect whether she told me exactly what he died from, but other than she told me he had died.
What did she ask you to do?
To prepare a statement of what we had done and what we had observed.
Did she ask you any questions about what you had, like I'm asking you now, what you had observed, how sick he was, what symptoms you could see? Did she ask you any of those things?
I don't remember her asking me anything like
Okay.
that, no.
And so all she asked you to do was write a report and send it to her?
Yes.
Okay. Did you and Mr. Shepard do that together?
Yes, we did.
Tell us how you did that.
We discussed what to write in it. Mr. Shepard wrote it down, and then dispatcher typed it up, and I believe we both signed it.
Okay. Did you send it to Lieutenant Moore?
Yes.
Did anybody from Sedgwick ever call you and say, we'd like to talk to you about what you wrote down?
No.
Okay, this is in evidence in Exhibit 2 and Exhibit 5. And it's date stamp, I believe, 47 around. I'll put it on the Elmo, too, so you could see it right there while you're sitting there. I'm not very good at this, but I've learned how to work it. This is dated March the 11th, 2008. Is that, that would be the day, well, I don't even think he had died yet on March 11th. He was in a, I want you to assume he was in a coma. On March 11th, 2008, he would be removed from life support on March 12th, 2008. Is it your recollection that, in fact, you did do it on March the 11th?
To my recollection, yes.
Okay. And do you know if Lieutenant Moore told you that he had died or that he was near death or something like that?
Your Honor, I'm struggling to know how this applies. I don't think it's relevant, this whole discussion.
May I respond?
Yes.
It is relevant because he never got any better. And if he was sick enough for Mr. Nichols to see and understand it and be in the position of a jailer on the 5th, unless there's some evidence in this case that he got better,
Counsel,
that
you
the
don't need
evidence
to raise your voice at me. I know that's why you called him as a witness, but your questions have to do with what he learned after Mr. Bruner was gone from the jail. What does that have to do with anything that concerns these two defendants?
I'm sorry, I'm not raising my voice. I just want to make sure. I'm probably being over-amplified.
Okay, but my question is the same.
I'm sorry, and could
Okay,
you ask
the
me?
last time he saw Mr. Bruner, we've covered that. What else does, and if he's made a statement about the events, you can question him about his statements, but all of this other seems to be irrelevant.
Okay, I'll continue, and maybe I asked an irrelevant question. Your recollection is that you wrote this letter at the time that Ms. Moore, or Lieutenant Moore, asked you to write it, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and you described the facts and circumstances of what you said happened here in court, correct?
Correct.
Could you read that to us, sir? Are you
The-
able to, or you want me to?
I'd prefer you read it. I don't have my glasses on.
Yes, sir. I was informed by other inmates that Mr. Bruner was sick on the morning of March the 5th. CO Jerold Nichols and myself, CO Carol Shepard, decided the morning of the 5th to call Ted Gibson and advise him of the situation and that Mr. Bruner needed immediate medical attention. Ted advised me, C.O. Shepard, to call Sedgwick Medical Department and ask them to get him the next transport. I called Joyce in the medical the same day, and she advised that she would get him transported back ASAP. I then called Ted back and said he would transport him back on March the 6th. Is that what you and Mr. Shepard wrote?
Yes,
And that's what happened.
yes.
Who is Ted Gibson, if you know or recall?
I personally did not know Ted Gibson's. A lot of times we would call for transport, or transport would call us to let us know who they were picking up. Mr. Gibson was the officer doing that.
And you told them that he needed immediate medical attention. Is that correct?
I did not talk to him, Mr. Shepard did.
Okay. Well, at least that's what's written down here.
Yes.
And after that, and after you provided this letter to Lieutenant Moore, did they ever call you back to ask you the type of questions I'm asking you now about what he looked like and how sick he was and anything like that?
Your Honor, I'm not sure that I understand the relevance of this inquiry. In fact, I know it's relevant.
What is the relevance?
That they didn't do an investigation, that they said they did an investigation and they didn't do one.
Your Honor,
What is that relevant to?
Because it's part of this is an institutional prevailing thing. The fact that, and it will eventually be tied up, that the two defendants claim they didn't see anything, and I presume the court is going to hear other explanations of why two people can't see what's in front of them. I'm just putting this all together because I'm sure there's going to be other witnesses in this case for the defendants who are going to try in some fashion to support the claims the defendant has made here.
Okay.
And this tends to impugn the claims.
Well, if that happens, then that would be appropriate rebuttal.
Okay, thank you. Anybody ever call you other than after this was written about this case, other than representatives of Mr. Bruner's, the attorneys for Mr. Bruner?
No, the last conversation I had was with Lieutenant Moore.
Okay. That was when she called to ask for this writing?
That's correct.
Okay. So since that time, which was on or before March 11th, the only contact you've had about this case at all was through people representing Mr. Bruner. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you for coming so far.
Cross-examination.
Mr. Nichols, you and I met when your deposition was taken out in Johnson City now several months ago. You remember that?
Yes, I do.
I didn't recognize you initially, but we have met, but I haven't talked to you since then, have I?
No.
Now, I want to talk to you about the exhibit you were just shown. That's the statement. And actually, you've got it up here. And I want to talk to you about this language, immediate medical attention. It was your feeling, as I understand your testimony, on March 5 that it would have been appropriate for Mr. Bruner to get immediate medical attention. Is that right?
My intention was to get something done with Mr. Bruner that day.
Okay. And I want to focus on the word immediate and what was meant there. You wanted to get him something done that day. You wanted him to go to the local doctor.
No, not necessarily.
You wanted maybe him to get some medication.
I wanted something done for him in the way of a decision to get him some help.
Okay, and that happened that day because the decision was made to transport him back to Sedgwick County to be seen by medical, right?
That's correct.
Now, immediate medical attention may mean different things, and so I need to focus on that for a second. You could have called 911 if you thought this guy was an emergency and had him whisked off to the local hospital, right?
Exactly, yes.
There is a hospital in Johnson City, correct?
Yes, there is.
And there is a relationship between the local doctor there that comes and treats inmates for your facility, right?
Yes.
So if you thought that his condition was such that he needed to be packed up and taken immediately to the hospital in Johnson City, that's something you had the ability to do either individually or by calling your sheriff.
Yes, I could have done that without sheriff's permission or...
So without stating the obvious, that wasn't your feeling. You didn't see his condition as being one where he needed to be in a doctor's office right away.
No, I did not.
Now, as to the hospital out there, how far is the hospital located from the jail in Johnson City?
2 blocks.
Now, you indicated, I think, in response to a question to from Mr. Feiger, that your concern really wasn't so much how he looked, but rather the fact that you were told that he had blood in his stools.
That's correct.
That was your primary concern as to why you thought he needed to be seen immediately, right?
That's correct.
Had that not been communicated to you, then he would have looked just like, what, a person who had the flu?
I believe so, yes. That's how I seen it.
He told you he had the flu, didn't he?
Yes.
You felt he had the flu, didn't you?
Yes.
And when you talked about him in describing his condition to Mr. Feiger, were you describing someone who had symptoms of the flu?
Yes.
He didn't want to go to a doctor, you say. Is that what he told you?
Yes, he did not want to go to the doctor.
And when you asked him about if he had blood in his stools and asked him to confirm that, when you asked him whether he hadn't been eating, he didn't respond to you, right?
That's correct.
It was because he appeared miffed, right?
Yes.
I mean, he wasn't confused, was he?
No.
He just didn't want to talk about it and was angry that another inmate had even raised the issue with you. Isn't that what you understood?
That's the way I understood it, yes.
You never talked to Deputy Gibson?
Personally, no, I did not.
Didn't talk to Sedgwick County Medical?
No.
Next morning, that is on the 6th, you saw Mr. Bruner, and on that occasion, he was resting, and you didn't see anything that suggested to you that he'd gotten any worse or any better than when you'd seen him before, correct?
No, he
Looked about the same?
He looked the same. I observed him all night, just sitting on his bunk and sleeping a little bit.
Okay. Now, you probably saw him giving your duties on March 5, is that right?
Yes.
March 3, you probably saw him.
I don't recollect whether I was on shift on the 3rd or not.
Do you remember being on the shift on the 5th?
Yes.
When you saw him on the, do you remember being on the shift on the 4th?
Yes.
Okay. When you saw him on the 4th, did he appear sick at all?
No.
So what you saw was an individual who appeared to have a flu, who didn't want to go to a doctor on March 6th, and in terms of what his symptoms were. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
And bottom line, although he appeared to have the flu to you, he didn't really appear to be that sick, did he?
No, he did not.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions.
Redirect.
So even though you felt he was maybe just had the flu, was just getting sick, was sweating, and you thought even with just thinking he had the flu that you wanted to get him medical help?
Due to the inmate who informed us of him, yes.
Explain what you mean by that.
Well, that morning at breakfast, another inmate had told us that he had been sick and had bloody stools, and he was generally concerned about him.
Okay. Why do you remember him?
He had been there before in our jail.
Do you remember the people who have been there?
Yes, we have a small jail, only of 25, 30 people. If they're in there for a short or long period of time, we get to know them.
Okay. Thank you for doing your duty and trying to get treatment for Mr. Bruner. Thank you.
I don't have anything else, Your Honor.
Counsel, this is not an appropriate time for little gratuitous speeches like that. Can this witness be excused?
Yes.
Any objection?
No,
Mr.
Your Honor,
Chalmers?
I'm sorry, I
Okay.
phased out there.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. You're excused. Plaintiff's next witness.
Is Nelson.
Ms. Nelson, would you please step here into the witness box and raise your right hand so that you can be sworn?
You solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to give in the case now hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
My name is Sharon K. Nelson, SharonNelson.
Go ahead, counsel.
Just bear with me for just 1 second. I'm just trying to find something. I'll be right with you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could you tell everyone your name, please?
Sharon K. Nelson.
And is it Ms. or Mrs.
Ms.
Nelson? Ms. Nelson. Nice to meet you. My name is Jeffrey Feiger.
Nice to meet you.
You and I have never met before, have we?
No.
And you and I have never spoken together or about anything, have you?
No.
And I think that you're here under a subpoena that we served upon
Yes.
your lawyer. Are you working for ConMed?
Yes, I am.
Okay. What is your job? Let me just say preliminarily, I have some questions to ask you about what we're doing here in court. May I have permission to ask you those questions?
Okay.
I don't mean in any way to embarrass you or frighten you or any way. And if you don't understand anything that I'm saying, just let me know, okay?
Okay.
Okay, thank you. What is ConMed?
ConMed is a corporation that takes care of the hire staffing to take care of correctional facilities around the country.
And does ConMed mean cons? You provide medication or medical services to cons? Is that it, or is there some other name?
I've never asked that question.
Oh, because I heard it. I said it was. And what is your job?
I'm an RN, one of the staff nurses.
Okay. And how long have you been one of the staff nurses?
4 years.
Okay. And where do you get your training to be a nurse?
At Fort Hays State University. Fort Hays State University in Hays, Kansas.
And how long have you been an RN?
Almost 42 years.
And you've been at ConMed for 4 years?
Yes.
When did you start there?
When did I start there?
Yeah.
I started in January of 2008.
So in March of 2008, when the events involving Mr. Bruner occurred, you would have been there 3 months or less. When did you start in January?
Oh, somewhere around the 21st, I believe.
21st, and Mr. Bruner was there on March the 10th. It was a little more than a month that you had been there.
Yes.
Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay. And what was your job there?
We have various jobs. There's usually 3 or 4 minimal nurses per shift, and somebody will take care of the inmates that are in the clinic, in the infirmary, so to speak. And then we have other duties, inmates that come up for sick call, or you draw their blood sugars and give their insulins, different things.
In other words, you pass out medication.
Yes.
Do you actually go out on the pods and pass out medication?
No, the medication aides that work in the pharmacy do that.
Okay, the medication aids. Okay. Now, am I correct that nurses are not permitted to diagnose or treat patients?
Not without a doctor's order.
That's right. You're not licensed to diagnose or
That's
treat
right.
patients. Am I correct?
That's right.
In other words, if somebody said, I want to come to you and have you diagnose me, that would be a violation of the law.
Yes.
Okay. Now, my understanding is also that, I'm going to take you back to March the 10th. There was no doctor, but I guess I should ask you, do you know, if you have personal information, if you don't, just let me know, because again, I've never spoken to you before about this. Do you know if ConMed, what the contract was with Sedgwick, in other words, what they agreed to do or not do?
I do not know.
Well, what were you set up were you always stationed in the Sedgwick jail? Have you always been there?
You mean in the last 4 years since I've worked for ConMed?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Where is this so-called, I've heard the word clinic. What is it? Is it a room or what?
The whole clinic area of the jail is on 2nd floor, and there is a large waiting area with chairs, and then around the perimeter of that waiting room is our separate exam rooms and the room that we use for lab and the pharmacy. And then there is what we call Team Central, which is an enclosed with locked door space where the nurses, where our charts are kept and our medication card that we use for the inmates that are in the clinic. And we have around the perimeter of that Team Central room are the cells that we have inmates in that are basically like in the hospital.
I think I heard this today, and Mr. Chalmers may have misspoken, but you have antibiotics in your clinic, don't you?
Yes, we do.
So if somebody needs antibiotics, they can get them, right?
Yes.
Now, were you ever interviewed at all by anyone in this case regarding what you observed and what you saw regarding Mr. Bruner?
Yes.
Oh, you were? By who?
By the ConMed attorney.
And other than the attorney, anybody else?
No.
Okay. I'm not interested in anything that happened between you and an attorney, but I just wonder if anyone from Sedgwick County investigating the death of Mr. Bruner ever talked to you about what you saw and what you heard and what you observed.
No, never.
Yeah, not thinking that this is relevant, for it is, it's escaping me.
The only relevance that I can see of this would be if she made a statement to somebody during the investigation. I think she said she didn't, so
That's right. That's all I asked.
we don't need to get into whether Sedgwick County conducted an investigation because it's really not part of this lawsuit.
No, my question was, did anybody ask her any questions regarding the death of Mr. Bruner from Sedgwick County? And she said no, and that was, he objected, but I thought that question was appropriate.
I thought you asked whether Sedgwick County conducted an investigation.
No,
so-
I'm sorry, I didn't.
All right, let's move on.
Yes, Your Honor. And so you've never, other than with the attorney, given a written or oral statement to anybody from Sedgwick County, correct?
No, I have not.
Okay. Other than the attorney, did you give anybody a written and oral statement at ConMed?
No.
Okay. Who were you working with that night, if you recall?
On the night that we're talking about,
Yes, on the night that Mr. Bruner's brain herniated.
I do not remember.
Okay.
I don't know.
Have you talked to any, and I'm not talking about lawyers, but any of your coworkers? Did you talk with any of your coworkers about what you saw or observed or recall?
No, I have not.
How about, is there a Lisa Glass? Is that a person? Tina Glass. How about Tina Glass?
I haven't talked to her before today.
Okay, yeah. She was subpoenaed here today too, but I just mean if you had occasion to work with her after Mr. Bruner got sick and talk about what you saw or heard.
I'm sure we worked together. We were on separate shifts, but we would overlap sometimes. But I don't recall that we ever spoke about that.
Okay. Did you ever, I know you've told us you never talked to anybody except the ConMed attorney, but since Mr. Bruner was eventually diagnosed as having bacterial meningitis, were you aware that as a nurse, state law requires that the Kansas Board of Control be notified concerning the facts and circumstances of his death?
But that,
Excuse me, there's a,
This can't have anything to do with this case, and I've
Of course,
counsel, would you approach?
I just want to confirm, other than, you haven't reported anything to anyone or anywhere, right?
No, I have not.
How did you become aware? Do you know who I'm talking about when I say Mr. Bruner?
Yes,
How do you know who I'm talking about?
from reading over my notes,
And what notes would you be referring to?
the nurse's notes that I made.
Okay. I have those nurses' notes. I think I have the same ones as you, and they're in evidence, but, Your Honor, may I approach the witness for just a second? I'm going to show you 3 notes I have and ask you to look at them and tell me if there are others that I didn't see. I'm just going to, they're in evidence, but I'll talk to you about them in just a second. But I see your names on those 3 documents. Could you look at them and tell me, are there more, or are those the only 3 that you've looked at?
Those are the only ones.
Okay. You have neat writing for most people.
Pardon?
I could read your writing. I'm sure you've been complimented on your writing. How did you come, in reading, does this help you then remember what happened or how you were involved?
It helps me to remember the patient. It helps me to remember his general condition, but I can't remember any detail.
Okay. In other words, looking at this helps you remember, but you don't have an independent memory of it.
Right.
Okay. Looking at these records, these are in evidence as Exhibit 2 and Exhibit 5, Your Honor. If I'm not mistaken, the first entry by you is here at, am I correct, 1720?
That's right.
I think I have that here. That's you, 1720. What is that time? I mean, at military time, what is that? What time is that?
5:20 p.m.
5:20 p.m. Now, do you know actually what time he was brought to the clinic?
I do not.
Okay. It says in a note above you, and do you know who wrote that note?
That was written by Tina Glass.
Okay. It's untimed. There's a place where you can put time, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any time next to on Mr. Bruner's records as to when he arrived?
No.
Okay. It said here he arrived in the clinic unalert and unresponsive to painful stimuli. Do you see that?
Yes.
Is that what you were talking about when you said it helped you to look at the records to determine way he looked when he was brought there?
I was talking about my notes that I personally made.
So you mean you don't, when you're a nurse and you come on board or you come in board, you don't look at what somebody wrote just above you?
Yes, I do that. But when I was trying to jog my memory for this case, I was reading, it was my notes that jogged my memory about the patient.
Okay. We'll get to your notes in a second. And this note that was written at an unknown time, is that what, assuming Miss Glass wrote that, is that what you recall? that he was unalert, unresponsive to painful stimulus.
Yes.
Now, am I correct, just from a nursing perspective? You are not allowed to be a doctor or diagnose, but just from a nursing perspective, are you taught that it is a very bad sign if somebody is so unresponsive that they do not respond to pain?
It could depend on the cause, but in general, it's not good.
Am I correct that you're taught as a nurse, and I'm not asking you for expert medical opinions, but you're taught that the reaction to painful stimuli, the failure to respond to that, that's literally what pain response is, one of the last things that goes.
I'm not the expert on that. However, it just means that their level of consciousness is something other than alert, but there could be all kinds of reasons for that.
In this case, did you ever learn what the reason for this was?
Later,
You learned that he had streptococcus, pneumonia, that turned into sepsis and meningitis and herniated his brain. Is that what you learned?
I just heard the meningitis.
Okay. You heard bacterial meningitis, correct?
I don't even remember if I heard that.
All right. You also, or at least there's written down a history of hepatitis C and cirrhosis of the liver.
Yes.
Am I not correct, and you tell me, but I think I'm correct, that when you come on board and you treat a patient that has been treated by the nurses before you, that one of your jobs is to look at their notes to see what's gone on before you came to do whatever you're going to do?
Your Honor, I hate to be pest again, but I don't think this has to do with the issues in this case. Jack, it's not relevant.
What is the relevance?
His condition on the day in question. This is the 10th. This is the day that we're talking about in terms of these defendants. And this is the condition that he was brought in to the clinic from where the defendants claim they weren't aware he was sick. I think it's
I think you need to phrase your questions in a way which more specifically focuses on apparent symptoms.
Are you aware of his, or at least it's written down that he has a past medical history?
Yes.
Where do you get that information from?
We have verbal report from the off-going nurse to the ongoing nurse on every patient.
Got it. So you, the off-going nurse, reports to you what they've done and seen and know to the incoming nurse.
And we take notes. We have a report sheet and we take notes.
Got it. So there's a continuity.
Yes.
It's not like you come aboard and it's like nothing ever happened before that.
No.
Okay. Says here, skin with moderate jaundice. What is jaundice?
Jaundice is yellowing of the skin.
And you can actually see that.
Yes.
Now, you don't know what that's from. You're a nurse. You can't diagnose it, but it's not good when somebody's yellow, is it?
Generally not.
Okay. And it says abdomen distended and firm. What does that mean?
A normal person's abdomen is soft when you palpate and not distended, just, fairly flat. And when it's distended and firm, it's abnormal.
Again, it's a bad sign.
Again, depending on what's the cause.
Sure. It says unable to ambulate. That means unable to walk, right?
Right.
It says skin warm to touch turgor. One capillary refill slow. What does that mean, if you can help us?
Turgor means how dry their skin may be or brittle, and capillary refill is how fast, if you pinch their fingertips, and they blanch how fast they get pink again.
I see. So going backwards, capillary refill slow, if that means that it doesn't get pink again fast.
It takes longer than 3 seconds.
And that's a bad sign from a nursing perspective.
Yes.
What is I know you said what turgor, but what does it mean here in this, if you know, in this?
Turgor means if the skin is moist and full, or if it's dry and brittle and crackly.
And that's what his skin was, dry, brittle, and cracky, according to this?
According to that, skin turgor was poor.
And is that a bad sign?
Depends on the cause.
What do you mean, I mean, depend on the cause? Since you don't diagnose them, it's just from a nursing perspective, what do you mean depends on the
There
cause?
are probably hundreds of things that could cause that.
No, I know. But you don't do that. You don't make that diagnosis.
No, we just write down our assessment of what we see.
Right. For instance, as a nurse, if you find an unconscious patient, there could be 100 causes for unconsciousness. But you know you got to get a doctor in there, right?
If they're unconscious, yes.
Okay.
Brett.
I guess, let me ask, a doctor was never saw him. If he was in that clinic sometime between 4 and 10, approximately 6 hours, he was never seen by a doctor, was he?
He was seen by a physician's assistant.
Okay, no.
We do
You
not
understood
have a
my-
doctor there all the time.
Okay, so my question was, and you agree with me, or do you? He was never seen by a doctor there.
That's right.
Okay. And a physician's assistant isn't a doctor, is it?
No.
They haven't gone to medical school, have they?
I don't know what their training is.
Okay. Now, when you came on, did you would it be your practice to have been advised by Miss Glass of what she saw and wrote, just like you told us?
Yes.
Did she tell you when he came there? Because she didn't write it down.
I don't know what time he got there.
Okay.
He was there before, maybe before shift change at 3 o'clock, but that doesn't mean he was admitted into the clinic at that time. He could have been in the exam rooms, still being assessed.
Now, you say he was there before 3?
I don't know what time he got there.
What time did you get there? I guess I should
I
ask.
got there at 3.
Was he there before you got there?
He would have been in the clinic area before I got there.
Well, we have a record and evidence from the defendant, Sedgwick County, Exhibit 403, that said he wasn't moved from his cell until 3:27. So that's obviously wrong.
Not necessarily.
I'm sorry, I apologize. I thought you told us you got there at 3 and he would have got there before you.
Okay, let me explain. Our shift changes at 3 o'clock. While we're getting report from the previous clinic nurse, the day shift continues to take care of anybody that comes up to the clinic because they're sick. This inmate was taken care of apparently in the treatment room while we were getting report for the next shift.
By who?
Tina Glass was not the clinic nurse that day. She was the one that was taking care of the inmate during report.
So who was taking care of him?
Who was the clinic nurse on day shift?
that would have been taking care of him?
Tina Glass was taking care of him.
But you said she wasn't the clinic nurse taking care of him.
No. When I say clinic, I'm talking about the infirmary area. But there's that whole waiting area outside with the exam rooms. And other nurses take care of patients in those rooms before they're admitted into the infirmary area.
Okay. Again, my question is, if it's the claim in this case by the jail that they didn't take him out of the cell until 3:27, that's not consistent with what you remember, is it?
I don't remember. I'm just talking about what time I get report. It's between 3 and 3:30. What goes on during that time outside of the infirmary area is taken care of by other nurses.
Okay. So, you don't know if he was still in his cell at 3:30?
I do not know.
Okay. You don't know if he was still in his cell at 3:45?
I do not know.
Okay. Thank you. Did you ask Tina Glass what time he arrived? I guess that was my question.
No.
Have you spoken to the attorney or gone over your testimony with the attorney for Sedgwick, or the jailers for Sedgwick?
Not for Sedgwick attorney, for ConMed attorney.
No, yeah. I'm just talking about the gentleman sitting at council table. Have you gone over your testimony?
No.
There is a note before yours. It's dated. It's timed 17:30. And your note is timed 17:20. And unless time goes backwards, that means that both of you wrote the note way later and then filled in the time. Right?
Are you asking me a question?
Right, yes. I mean, unless time goes backwards, which it obviously does, you weren't writing these notes at the time that you were...
We rarely do.
Okay. So you must have written your note much later than 7:30 or 17:30, even though you timed it at 17:20, which is I think 17:20 is what, 5:20.
5:20.
So you could have written that note at what, 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock or what?
I don't know.
Okay.
But I time it for when I actually saw the patient.
Okay. How do you recall when you saw the patient, if you write it later?
The only thing I can recall is after I had read my notes, I do remember that he was not responding normally neurologically. He was not alert. He was not focusing on me when I spoke to him. He was not following directions or instructions.
Now, before we actually get into your note, I want to ask you a couple things. Isn't it part of your practice, and aren't you taught in nursing school, when you take over a patient like this, who's not responding, who's yellow, who's got some very, very bad signs, did you say, how long has he been like this?
I would have been given a history when I got report on him.
So you would have asked, that's part of your job, how long has this man been like this?
Could be. I don't remember.
Nobody wrote down you didn't write down a history, did you? In other words, how long he'd been like that?
No.
And neither did anybody else, did they?
Not that I saw.
Why?
I don't know.
Wouldn't that be really important to know how long a man had been unconscious?
Possibly.
and nobody did it.
It was possible that it got passed on to us verbally. I don't remember.
Well, that's possible, but that, of course, wouldn't help him unless it's written down, right?
Possibly.
Are you saying you have no memory of how, you didn't ask the question, or you did and you don't remember what you were told?
I don't remember that day.
Okay. When you spoke to Miss Glass today, have you ever asked her or anybody else, how long was he like that?
No, I did not.
Counsel, where are we going with this?
We're going with
What
this.
does this have to do with what these two defendants knew about Mr. Bruner's condition?
Because he was very, if we had evidence in this case written down, like the witness indicates, normally it's written down, that he'd been sick for days, that he hadn't eaten for days, somebody would have had to know that. And
But
these
you're
are the
asking her, there's no evidence that she knew he had been sick for days. And there's
That's-
no evidence that the other people that she was talking to knew that he had been sick for days. Are you gonna
because it's
tie
not
this up?
written. Because in this case, it's not written down.
Well, she said they could have been briefed orally. So the fact that it wasn't written down, why are we hammering on this? Because this has nothing to do with these two defendants.
It does, Your Honor. It has everything to do with these two defendants. When two defendants who had total custody of him for the 10 hours previous to this claim they saw nothing, if there was a history where they had been told in the clinic he'd been like this for days, that would tend to add proof to the pudding, so to speak, about what's the truth in this case, which is what we're doing here. We're searching for the truth.
I think you need to move on. Yeah.
I too think it's relevant. You got your question.
I'll move on, Your Honor. Now, your note, why don't we read that? Are you able to read it?
You want me to read it?
Sure.
Resting in bed with chest posy on.
Could I ask you a question first? I'm going to allow you to read the full thing, but it will be helpful if I just ask you as we go on. What does chest posy mean?
It is a cloth restraint, kind of like a little vest that you put on that has ties to it that you can crisscross on their back and tie it under the bed so that they don't fall out and injure themselves.
Got it. Go ahead.
With chest posy on, tries to set up and falls out of bed. Verbally unresponsive, eyes open but unfocused, non-responsive to verbal stimuli, lung sounds clear to auscultation.
Got it.
Does not eat or even try to
Well,
drink.
wait, I understand. I just want to stay with that note for just a second.
Okay.
Now, were you the nurse taking care of him at that point?
Yes.
Okay. At that point, were you aware that blood had been taken?
I don't remember.
Okay. Let me see if I can refresh your memory. This is another record in this case. This is a medical order sheet. Is there an order for blood on this sheet, if you know?
Yes, there is.
Is this the order?
Yes.
Now, normally, there's a time written in too. Did anybody write the time when his blood was taken?
Not on this sheet.
Okay. Here's another sheet from the same exhibit. This is Terry Bruner, would this be the blood results?
Yes.
And this says specimen date and time 16:10. What
That-
time would that be?
That would have been 4:10 p.m.
Okay. And am I correct in reading this that it says it was faxed? It was faxed and called to Melissa at 18:10. When would that be?
6:08 p.m.
Okay. Are you able to read the blood results? In other words, as a nurse, are you able to see whether something is so out of line that there's a real emergency going on?
Yes.
Did you see the blood results in this case?
I don't remember.
Okay, if you would have seen something as, for instance, that his white blood cell count was 34,000, when the normal range is 4,000 to 10,000, would that have raised, as a nurse, a emergent alarm?
I would have definitely reported it.
To who?
Physician or physician's assistant.
Okay. Did you report anything?
I don't remember.
The reason I ask you is between the time that you first saw him at 5:20, and before you saw him, where he was clearly unresponsive to pain stimuli, he was unconscious or semi-conscious. He had all the conditions you said. Do you know why he laid in that clinic and wasn't taken to the hospital between the time that you saw him until 10 o'clock at night?
I don't know.
Did you ever ask anybody why we didn't get him to the hospital sooner?
It's up to the medical staff.
You are the medical staff.
No, I'm the nursing staff.
Oh, who's the medical staff?
The physician's assistant.
Oh, the physician's assistant. A
Yes.
non-doctor is the quote-unquote medical staff?
That's who was there at the time.
Did you learn he died?
Later, and I don't remember how much later.
You never asked anybody, including that physician assistant, why he laid it there for 6 hours?
No.
Now, it looks like the physician assistant saw him after you saw him, but wrote a note before you wrote a note.
That's because he probably had the chart in his hand at the time.
And do you know what that says, or should we have to talk to him?
I can read most of it.
Okay, what does it say?
It said, reviewed above note. The O stands for objective. That's what he sees. Abdomen distended, liver enlarged, hemoccult positive, bowel sounds positive. I don't know what this last word says. Second line is slight yellow color to I'm not sure what that is.
That's okay. Anything else?
I don't know what this is. The last line is liver function. And then P is the plan, and it says C order.
Okay. And then there's an order timed about the same time to give him salt water, normal saline.
Normal saline. 1 liter at 200 milliliters per hour.
And what else?
Something IV lock.
Okay.
In other words, we should start a saline lock, and when the fluids are finished, keep the saline lock in case he needed more IVs.
Did you ask the physician's assistant why he was giving an unconscious man salt water?
He was not unconscious.
He had regained consciousness?
He has never been unconscious. He was responding abnormally.
Got it. So when it says unresponsive to painful stimuli, that doesn't mean his eyes weren't open. It just means that he wasn't comprehending anything.
That's right.
Got it. Now, if he was taken to the clinic at 3:30, it appears the first time the physician's assistant saw him is 2 hours later, that he laid there for 2 hours without any medical seeing him.
I don't know. He may have seen him back in the exam room before he ever came into the clinic. I do not know.
Is there any note of that?
No.
And I guess you're familiar with the phrase, if it's not written, it wasn't done.
That's right.
When is the next note that you wrote, Ms. Nelson?
Then I wrote one at 1800. Does not eat or even try to drink any liquids.
Okay. And you wrote another note at
At 1850,
50, yeah.
1,000 cc's of normal saline connected to saline lock in left forearm, infusing well at 200 cc's per hour.
Did you say to the physician's assistant, because apparently you're the person who's giving him salt water, why are we doing this?
For fluids,
Did you ask him, why aren't we calling an ambulance to take him to the hospital?
no.
What changed between the time you got the blood work on 608 and the time he went by ambulance to the hospital? Did something change since you were the nurse taking care of him? 5 hours later, assuming he went to the hospital about, what they called the ambulance about 10 o'clock, did something change between 6 and 10 that made you call the ambulance?
I don't remember.
Well, let's look at the note. You saw him last, according to the note, at 6:50. When is the next note that you saw?
2120,
What's that? What time is that?
9:20 p.m.
So that's almost 3.5 hours later, right?
Yes,
Who was taking care of him for 3.5 hours?
I was.
And what were you doing?
What do you mean?
Well, I guess I shouldn't say that. What was he doing? Was he getting better? Was he getting worse? Why was he just lying there?
If there's no notes written, it generally means that there's been no change in his assessment.
Okay. And that's my next question to you. Take a look at your note at 9:20. And then it looks like the ambulance was called about 9:40. And so I'm asking you, what changed between the time he got into the clinic at sometime between 3 and 4 and almost 10 o'clock to make somebody call the ambulance? You called the ambulance. Is that correct?
It would have been the physician's assistant who gave the order to call the ambulance.
Okay, and you wrote it down. Did you call the ambulance?
No, the security, the deputies call the ambulance,
Okay.
or the sergeant.
Did he tell, would it be the physician assistant gives you the order to tell the deputy to call?
Yes,
Okay. When he told you that, did you ask him, why are we doing it now?
I don't remember.
Did you write anything down about that? About why they decided to finally get him into the hospital at 10 o'clock?
I can only guess. I don't know for sure.
When you say you can only guess, I don't want you to guess. So Do you know, I don't,
I do
have
not
any
know for
knowledge?
sure.
Okay. Let's read I'm sorry. Do you have any knowledge?
I don't know for sure. I don't remember.
Okay. What's your final, or it's not your final note, but the next note at 9:20 say?
Rocephin, 1 gram given IV push as ordered.
What is Rocephin?
It's an antibiotic.
Okay. So they finally somebody ordered an antibiotic at 9:20. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Inmate moaning and thrashing arms around, but continues to be nonverbal. Normal saline continues to infuse well at 200 cc's per hour.
Okay. And then finally, it says 7 is, have you written any other note here?
Just the one at 2140.
Okay. Now, here's my next series of questions. He gets sent to a hospital, and you participated in sending him there, correct?
Yes.
You were part of the people who were there,
Yes.
correct? He gets put on an ambulance, and he gets sent to the emergency room. Did you know that?
Yes.
Okay. And he's taken there by medical personnel or deputies?
Medical personnel.
Who?
The paramedics on the ambulance.
Oh, I understand that, but I'm talking about they're the EMS drivers, right?
Yes.
They don't have any prior knowledge of him. They haven't been taken care of, right?
Right.
They just arrive, have a stretcher, put him on a stretcher, and rush him to the hospital, correct?
Yes.
Okay. When he gets to the hospital, how do they know what's been going on with him?
The physician's assistant always calls the emergency room doctor and gives a report about that.
So if there's a history in the medical records from Mr. Bruner, the physician's assistant always calls and tells the doctor what's been going on with the patient, right?
Yes.
Okay. And presumably he tells the truth, right?
Yes.
Okay. So if we look in the medical records of Via Christi and we see a history on a man who can't talk, we'll know that that came from the physician's assistant who calls the hospital doctor and tells him what the history is, right?
I would assume so, yes.
That's the practice, isn't it?
Yes.
I move for admission of those other documents based upon the hearsay objection now, providing the foundation as to the identity of who provided the history and the reliability of the history.
Your Honor, I think she's just making assumptions. They may be right. Fortunately, Mr. Fletcher is listed as a witness. We can get to the bottom of it.
This is the practice and this witness is intimately involved, and I don't think the court needs to go through calling witnesses that we all know that this witness, Ms. Nelson, is telling the truth, and this is what happened.
You need to give me a rule number that you're relying on to get past that second level of hearsay. I've already admitted the hospital records,
No, I understand.
except for the parts that are redacted.
Right, and
So we need to go through each of the individual redactions, and you tell me how those satisfy an exception to the hearsay rule. Are you
okay.
prepared to do that right now?
Yeah, but I'd rather not take up the time right now, but I'll bring it up outside the presence of the
Okay.
jury. Just to be, that's been the practice, and that's your understanding of the practice, isn't it?
Yes.
And obviously, the physician's assistant, or at least in terms of your understanding of the practice, would want to be accurate, correct?
Yes.
Is it possible that you, I don't want you to say anything. I just want you to read something I'm going to hand to you. And ask you from the records, just read it to yourself. If this refreshes your recollection about his past history. Okay?
Okay.
That hurts the... And specifically, let me point out for you what I want you to read. That.
Okay.
Read it to yourself. Don't read it to anybody else. You all read it? Does that refresh your recollection about what his history had been?
About the same as what my notes refresh my memory about.
Well, does that specifically, in terms of his history, how long he'd been like this, does that refresh your recollection?
Not really, because I don't remember what I was told in report about how long he had been sick or anything.
Okay.
I just remember the patient himself from reading my notes in general.
Sure. Okay. After Mr. Bruner went to the emergency room, did you have any further contact with anyone or discussions with anyone about Mr. Bruner?
Not that I recall.
It's possible you did, you just don't recall it.
I don't recall.
Okay. I think that's all the questions I have right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cross-examination.
Here you go. For later. I just have one more question, Your Honor. Was he just as sick when you first saw him as when he was taken by the ambulance to the hospital?
I don't remember. I don't remember.
Do the medical records indicate he was any different between the time you first saw him and the time you last saw him?
Not really.
Thank you.
I've got just a few questions, I hope. I represent these two individuals here. I don't think we've met, have we?
I recognize their face. I know them, yes. What did you ask me?
I don't think we've met, have we?
No, we have not met.
No, okay, all right. To begin with, you said that the medical records didn't seem to show much of a change between the time that you first saw Mr. Bruner, which would have been shortly after you came on shift on March 10, to the time he was taken to the hospital?
From what I can tell, it was just more of the same, I believe, other than he was maybe even less alert than he had been.
Okay, so there did seem to be some progression during the time that you saw him in terms of his being alert.
Neurologically, yes.
And when you answered that, I had understood, and I want to make sure it's clear that you're talking about how he would have appeared kind of by gross examination. We're not talking about what might have been learned by blood tests or any of the other things that were going on. Is that right?
You mean from what I charted?
Yeah. I mean, your statement that he appeared to be pretty much the same, although he seemed to be a little bit worse during that time frame. That's based on your gross observations, and it
Yes.
doesn't have to do with the blood tests or results or anything like
Right.
that. Okay. Now, without the blood tests, a decision was not made, well, let me put it this way, a decision was not made until the blood test came back to send him to the hospital, is that right?
That's normal.
Okay. Let me back up for a second. During the time that you saw him, was he in an emergent situation where he needed to go into the hospital?
I don't remember for sure. I just reading over my notes and remembering his general condition. It not necessarily would have meant that it was an emergent situation. I think it was a general consensus, it's the general practice to wait until you get lab results back and results of whatever tests may be ordered to find out kind of what's going on first. And in the meantime, do what you can.
And you were part of the team that was treating Mr. Bruner at that point on the 10th?
According to what orders were written.
And the approach of the team would have been usual, which is to continue to evaluate, get lab tests, and then make a decision where to go forward, right?
Yes, and those lab tests were drawn before I took over his care.
Great. And there are instances, however, haven't there been, in your experience, where you don't need to wait for lab tests. You just know it's now time to get him to the hospital.
That's a medical decision.
And I'm not asking you whether or not it's your choice, but there are instances where someone maybe has an obvious heart attack or someone who's got a stab
Exactly.
wound, those sorts of things.
Yes.
You don't need to wait for lab
Right.
tests. My point, I guess, is that this was an incident where, when I use the term emergent, I mean, it didn't appear to be an emergency such that he needed to go to the hospital the
No.
whole time you saw him.
Because when you look at his vital signs, his temperature was just barely elevated. His heart rate was normal. His blood pressure was normal.
You say his heart rate was normal. Where do you find that in the materials?
On the notes that were above the 5:30 note written by the PA, it's not timed.
Where one has difficulty breathing, that normally is associated with an elevated heart rate, isn't it?
His heart rate was 74.
Okay. And that's normal?
Yes.
And if one has difficulty breathing, that's ordinarily associated with an elevated heart rate, isn't it?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
The first vital sign written there says 93%. That means his oxygenation level in his lungs was 93%. Anything above 90% is normal.
Okay, so there's nothing that you saw in that chart at that point for your observation to suggest he had any difficulty breathing?
No.
No, meaning he didn't seem to have any difficulty breathing, correct?
He was fighting more than having difficulty breathing.
Okay.
And I charted that his lung sounds were clear. I could not hear anything abnormal in his lungs at the time that I assessed him.
Is there anything in your observation of this man that you reflect on your chart or your memory that shows his extended stomach looked like a mountain?
No, I did not chart about that.
And if there had been, if his stomach was so pushed out and so distended so that it would look like a mountain, is that something that would, and you'd observed it, that you would put on the chart?
Ordinarily, I don't know why I didn't. However, it had already been charted by the nurse before me.
Okay. It had shown that it had been distended by the nurse, but it's the size that I'm wondering whether if it looked like a mountain on a man's body, is that something that you would have?
That's a subjective assessment.
Now, you indicated the clinic is located on the second floor of the jail and it's staffed by medical personnel. Does it sometimes include doctors that are on the floor and treating patients?
We have a doctor we have 3 medical doctors on staff. They rotate 2 weeks at a time, generally come every day for the most part. Once in a while they can't come on a day, but they come to see any new patients in the clinic area or any of them that are pending what's going on with them. They see anybody that's been scheduled to be called up from a pod to be seen by the doctor for whatever reason. They look at the x-rays, they review with the clinic nurse and the PA on staff what's going on that day.
As part of the clinic at ConMed, they also provide mental health services, don't they?
Yes.
And there are mental health nurses and physician assistants that are on staff.
Usually.
All right, and similarly, there is a doctor that is involved when appropriate for the mental health end.
They have a psychiatrist that comes and oversees that department. I don't know how often he goes there.
You talked about med aid individuals, and their job is to go out and to pass medications out to the inmates who stay in their pods. Is that
Yes.
right? What is the training of a med aid, if you know?
They, I don't know the specifics. They have a course that they have to take through a technical school or college. There's a special medication aid course that they have to take and take a test and pass and be certified.
It's a few months course or a few week course?
I'm not sure how long it is.
Knowing enough about their training, does it even compare to the training of a registered nurse or a LPN?
It's not the same, no.
Med aids don't provide treatment, even at directions of the doctor.
Not generally. Other than, they can do vital signs. They do blood pressure checks.
Med
Like
aids
that.
don't make mental health assessments.
No.
The medications that are at the clinic, you indicated there are antibiotics, and I think maybe I was mistaken about that. Do you know if the antibiotics available at the clinic were of the type and nature that would be necessary to treat bacterial meningitis?
I do not know. I know that the one antibiotic that was ordered before he was transferred was Rocephin, and we do keep that on hand.
So we'd have to ask maybe Mr. Fletcher or one of the doctors to know what was available at the
Yes.
clinic. Now, let me talk to you about an exhibit that's in evidence. Plaintiff's Exhibit 2. Can you read that on the screen?
The highlighted part.
Great, yeah. It refers to Nurse Sharon and I lifted inmate Bruner out of the wheelchair and into bed. Reading that, do you have any recollection of assisting, this is by Deputy Jones, moving inmate Bruner from his wheelchair to the bed?
I do not recall.
But when you got there, you were replacing Nurse Tina Glass, right?
Tina was not the nurse that was in the clinic that day. Someone else was. So she's not the one who would have given me report on anybody except possibly this patient, because she was the one that was taking care of him back in the treatment room before he was admitted into the clinic. She was the one who would have drawn the blood and reported it to the physician's assistant and done whatever orders he gave her at that time.
And I'm just trying to get a chronology here, and it may be you can answer it real simply. Was Tina at the end of her shift when you were coming on your shift?
Yes.
Okay, so she would be, ordinarily she'd be finished at, what, 3:30 p.m.?
Yes, unless they're in the middle of anything.
But if they're in the middle of something, for instance, like dealing with
I
Mr.
only
Bruner,
try to stay and finish it up.
okay. And then you came on that day around 3 p.m., but you would have had briefing before you actually got out and starting to see an inmate
Yes,
patients.
I would have had a report.
So if, knowing the schedule, and knowing that Ms. Glass is the person who wrote the note up here on the chart, which is part of Plaintiff's Exhibit 4, we can conclude that this entry would have, or this activity, not necessarily the entry, but the activity would have taken place probably between 3 o'clock and, what, 3:45?
Or 4 o'clock, somewhere in
Okay.
there.
All right. Lastly, in Plaintiff's Exhibit 2, make sure that's right. Yeah, Plaintiff's Exhibit 2. It's been admitted to evidence. There's a document called a inmate screening report. The clinic provides nurses that will participate in the screening of inmates as they're brought in through booking. Is that right?
Yes.
And is that a
I was
position?
trying to figure out what you were asking me.
Okay, I'm sorry. And is the booking process and the screening medical process, is that something that you have participated in the past?
Yes.
And on this exhibit, do I read it correctly, and just real quickly, where it talks about Mr. Bruner, that his weight was 162 pounds and his height was 5 foot 10 inches on November 6, 2007?
Yes.
I don't have anything else.
Redirect.